to the final seminar of the Sloane Lab Online Symposium Series 2023, with subject Reconnecting Heritage Collections as Data, Infrastructure, and Participatory Engagement, Big Dreams, Big Challenges. The symposium is funded by Towards a National Collection, and it is co-hosted by University College London, TU Darmstadt, the British Museum, the Natural History Museum, the University of Southampton, and the University of Portsmouth. The series welcomes a range of speakers interested in the intersections between collections as data, cataloging histories and critical archival studies, heritage infrastructures, critical digital heritage, and information science. Throughout the event, we would like to welcome you to ask any questions you may have for our speakers using Zoom's Q&A function. All questions will be read by the hosts at the end of the session. Seminars are recorded and will be released via the Sloane Lab, subject to individual speakers granting us this permission. Finally, before we welcome our first speaker, please allow me to quickly go through the seminar's code of conduct. The symposium offers us a space to think and explore together. Speakers and attendees both contribute to making this space, the symposium, a success. We value and encourage all points of view expressed to build a constructive dialogue. In this spirit, questions should be asked through the Zoom Q&A function with respect and generosity in a way that promotes this dialogue and not shuts it down. In the highly unusual circumstance that questions are asked in a way that is disruptive, offensive, aggressive, or otherwise unacceptable, we will take appropriate steps, which may include asking the questionnaire to leave the seminar. We're hopeful that this will not be required. Now, I will pass on to my co-host, Marco Humbel, to introduce our first speaker. Marco.
Thank you very much, Brittany. And also welcome from me to our seminar series. I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Amalia S. Levi, who will give a talk titled Archival Dependencies, the Cascading Violence of Colonial Records. Amalia is currently conducting doctoral research at Bonn University's Center for Dependency and Slavery Studies on the community of enslaved people in Sephardic Jewish households in early modern Barbados, looking into issues of archives and knowledge production. She is an archivist, historian, and cultural heritage professional who has worked in the US and Barbados and has conducted numerous projects processing and digitizing archival collections and developing exhibitions. Through her research and praxis, she seeks to engage with archival silences to restore marginalized people into the historical record. Finally, she is passionate about public outreach work that engage with people with digitized collections. The floor is yours, Amalia. I'm looking forward to your talk.
If you have any questions for Amalia, please do post them in the Q&A function, and we will get to them at the end of the of both talks. So our next speaker is, I would like to welcome Rosemary Grennan, who co-runs Mayday Rooms, an archive and educational space in London, which seeks to connect histories and documents of resistance to contemporary struggle. Rosemary is one of the founders of Agit in Berlin, a public residency space which works of left histories and archival material. She's also completing a PhD in material and visual culture from University College London. Rosemary will present Leftovers Digital Archive, somewhere between automation and the handmade. Rosemary?
Sorry, I was muted. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Yes. Well, thank you for having me and giving the opportunity to present Mayday Rooms' work, both as an archive. It's a paper archive and its practices around digitization and building digital archives. I called it somewhere between automation and the handmade because maybe that will become more clear as the talk goes on. But some of the kind of more computational strategies we've used to sort through a large amount of digitized documents, but also very much paying attention to what those documents are and what it means to sort of digitally archive political ephemera. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Mayday Rooms to begin with, because I think our practices around paper archives really influence our approach to building a kind of digital archive. But I'm mainly going to look at a digital archiving project which was initiated by Mayday Rooms called Leftovers, and the project is ongoing and it seeks to create a shared online archive of radical, liberatory and working class movements and the documents that they've left behind. And so in this talk I want to treat it as an opportunity to lay out some of the thinking behind that, the practice around building the online collection and how it creates new possibilities of like different forms of archives and archival engagement. So yeah, I will look first at Mayday Rooms practices around the paper archive and how these are reflected in a digital environment, asking questions such as how can we build a shared and collaborative digital archives that move away from preoccupations of preservation, which dominates much archival practice, towards it promoting use and reuse of historical material. Leftovers has been structured and categorized in such a way that it emphasizes it becoming a resource for contemporary movements rather than a static repository. And then finally, I'm going to have a look at how Leftovers has helped us develop networks with sisterly archives who share digitization and we back up each other's data. And ultimately, I think these practices help us sort of break down maybe some of the authority of particular archival objects and transfer them into something that can be shared, copied, reactivated in the present rather than remaining confined to history. So Mayday Rooms was established in 2013 in the middle of kind of brutal austerity cuts to British public services, which saw the closure of many public libraries, community centres and cultural spaces, which were often kind of incubators for also cultural knowledge and social histories as well. So within this context, we founded Mayday Rooms as a sort of counter institution which is dedicated to safeguarding histories and documents of struggle and resistance, but also with a remit to connect them to contemporary struggle and protest. And that's why Mayday Rooms is called Mayday Rooms. It's obviously a reference to International Workers' Day, May Day, but it's also the International Distress Call, which we thought was something that needed to be highlighted within this kind of context of austerity and the enclosure of many kind of independent archives. And then it's also called Rooms because not only are we an archive, but we are also a kind of education and political resource space. So the many rooms, I'll just get a picture of the building. You can see the building here. Also houses a number of like political groups. We have trade unions, we have political research groups, we have publications, we have legal clinics, we have migrant rights groups, and they also use the building alongside the archive as well. And so we really try to make sure that the histories in this archive are also sort of continued into the present. I mean, sometimes they do their own thing and sometimes they interact with the archive and vice versa. It's not a sort of very static or like predetermined relationship, but we believe that it should be a resource center for people in the present as well. And you can also book rooms here to have events and do kind of organizing meetings as well. So a little bit different from a lot of archives. I wanted to go through briefly what we have in the archive. We started with 3 foundational collections and over the last 10 years have built up a paper archive of over 60,000 items and over 2,000 films and videos, and our digital archive has over 19,000 digitizations in it. And that's just an idea of, to give you an idea of the scale, not to, not that quantity is necessarily the aim. But you can see here a selection of different kind of collections we have. We have a lot around more kind of workerist movements around striking workers away from official trade unions, and so you can see here we have the documentation of class struggle in 1974. So this is more kind of like autonomous worker organizing. We have a lot of material around struggles around the automobile industry, and you can see that with the Ford special. We have a lot of feminist and Marxist feminist and women's liberation material. We have lots around sort of radical local press. We have material around anti-racist struggles and Black liberation. We have a lot of material around prison, organizing in prisons, and maybe would now be called sort of prison abolitionist material. We have a growing collection around struggles in Ireland post 68, and then the last one you can see, the alternatives are possible, is a really significant collection that we hold around the Lucas Plan, which was an attempt by workers at Lucas Aerospace to turn their factory over to socially useful production, which was previously an arms factory. And this kind of segues a bit into more kind of environmentalism and the anti-globalization movement as well. Our archive is mainly from the 60s onwards. We do have a few things that are a bit older than that, but it's, yeah, I usually describe it as a sort of post-68 archive of political ephemera. We don't really collect stuff that is sort of the more organized left. I would say it's more the kind of anti-authoritarian left. We wouldn't take stuff, say, from like the British Labour Party, not because it's necessarily that it shouldn't be taken, it's just that there are other places that can go as well, and that's not really our kind of remit. I just wanted to read out this quote, which was written about Mayday Rooms by the historian Peter Linebaugher. Maybe people know him. He was a student of E.P. Thompson's. And in his book, The Incomplete, True, Authentic and Wonderful History of Mayday, he writes a chapter called Archiving at the Mayday Rooms. And he donated this collection that you can see on the left, which is called NEPA News, which stands for New England Prisoner Association News. And this is based at Attica in New York State, just after the uprising at Attica as well. So in our day, the traces of our radical movements are being thrown into rubbish pits as state-sponsored austerity demands the commodification of every inch of space. And I can't see it because my thing's in the way. And with sinister intent destroys the evidence of our past, its joys, its victories. Clear out the closets, empty the shelves, toss out your old footage, shred the underground press, pulverize the brittle and yellowing documents. Thus, neoliberalism organizes the transition from old to new. They must silence alternatives. We do not want the voice of George Jackson to be silenced. His words still eloquently describe a desirable program, a necessary program. And I think that was just a really nice way of sort of summing up what we try to do with our material as well. It's not that we do archive and collect it and preserve it, but we also try and develop strategies around archival engagement, which I'll go into now. So we really focus on more building a space of archival engagement that goes outside of just sort of researchers and also often artists. We obviously still very much welcome them as well, but we try and put on events, skill shares, residencies that build a space of like looking at history and also archival material for those who would not normally do so as well. And you can see here, we've also developed strategies for working collectively on archives. You can see on the left, this is a scanathon, which is a kind of public scanning meeting. And this is really a chance for people to like delve into collections that they might not normally do or wouldn't necessarily have a reason to do as a sort of starting point. And we've done a lot of scanathons over the years. We also do collective mapping sessions. We did one on Black and people of colour squatting in London, which we thought was kind of an overlooked history of the squatting movement. And so that was an attempt to try and map that with through looking at the archive, but also people's own knowledge of the movement as well. We also directly bring the archive to particular struggles. So whenever we organise an event, we try to invite also social movement groups that are still involved in, say, like housing struggles or trade union struggles, feminist struggles, to kind of respond to that material as well and sort of contextualise that and show how these struggles kind of continue rather than being just confined to history. I brought this one because this was some teach outs we did on the UCU picket line, where reproductions of the archive also became a picket line as well. So we really tried to sort of look into the archive, see what is sort of contemporarily relevant, and also bring those out into different forms and workshops. We also do a number of projects, have done a number of projects that sort of build these digital resources. Well, not always digital, but these are some examples of digital resources that we've brought together. One is called, on the top left, is called Activist Media Project, which was an attempt to archive sort of video and photography from the anti-globalization movement to help build evidence for the undercover policing inquiry, which is still ongoing. On the top right is an archive of housing struggles from the last 10 years in London. That was actually quite a difficult one because we're predominantly a paper archive and we haven't really gone into doing born digital archiving. And obviously that has a lot of, there was not so much paper material, but it was also a really good way of talking to groups about how they archive themselves and also bringing together some of these groups that would not necessarily by geography be connected. We have an audio project called Mayday Radio, which tries to do audio responses to different parts of the archive as well. And we've been also during the pandemic doing online exhibitions. So our last one is called Seize the Media, and the one before that is called Print's Subversion in the Wapping Dispute. And we will be developing one around the Troops Out movement, which campaigned to get British troops out of the north of Ireland for 3 decades, and we're doing a big digitization project around that. But what I really wanted to talk to you guys today about is our digital archiving project, which is initiated by Mayday Rooms, but in collaboration with a group in Berlin called 0x2620, who are behind the software and the building of a lot of video archives, one that's called PADMA, Public Access Digital Media Archive, and then another two, which one is called BACMA, which was a video archive of the protest movements around Gezi Park in 2013, and also a collective based in Egypt called Muzarine, who created an archive called 858, again, around the protest movements in Tahrir Square. And this is a video archiving software which we have developed with the software developers to be useful for documents as well. And when we first started Mayday Rooms, we worked with a lot of, I think they get called shadow libraries. They're sort of big online repositories of books and sort of articles. There's one called Memory of the World, there's one called ARG. I think most famously there's one called LibGen, although we didn't work with them. And these are really kind of like big open access libraries. And at first we wanted to contribute our digitizations to these libraries. But very soon we realized that political ephemera like leaflets, posters, pamphlets, journals, all the material that comes with political movements that is sort of aimed to mobilize or to communicate or to constitute a group is not necessarily meant to be kept, is a much harder archival item to sit amongst, say, a series of books, which in a way are more easily identifiable as a kind of understandable object. So we decided to start developing our own ways of thinking through what it means to digitize ephemera, and build our archive around that accordingly. And so Leftovers is not a solely Mayday Rooms' collection. It is also brings in lots of other digital collections, be them small left archives online to sometimes we've actually data scraped bigger collections from bigger institutions, or sometimes people have just given us some files as well that we've then put up there as well. So it's not just Mayday Rooms' collection, but we wanted to create a sort of shared platform where everyone can sort of contribute to that archive. And that again is because we wanted to build it as a kind of common resource for people who wanted to, say, organize or look at the history of a particular type of organizing, rather than, again, it being a sort of historical repository. So at the moment we have 19,000 documents, and they've all been OCR'd and are fully text readable. And this being able to search within the documents through the software was a good way of actually figuring out some of the different metadata categories that we developed for the archive as well. Funnily enough, one of the fields that is very empty within our archive is that of author, because we're mainly dealing with political groups, collectives, or anonymously anonymously published material as well. So we have things like group, we have different, we have place and space, place being a geographical location and space being a lot of different key points that we see in the archive. May they be like squats or distribution centers or bookshops. And so we thought that this space as a less kind of objective category would be an interesting one. And so we spent a lot of time also searching for like key terms within the archive through this like full text search and the sort of advanced search capability as well, to narrow down collections, because obviously we can't read 18,000 documents as well. So we've tried more kind of different ways of data processing to try and get some of this names, places, and also doing more kind of manual searching. And one particular one which is always interesting is the field of tactics. And so we tried to come up with something where a metadata field which would help people who wanted to, say, organize a rent strike. And so we made a big list of different tactics, and we searched within the archive and narrowed. I mean, if you search strike within this archive, you obviously get about 6,000 documents that mention strike. So it's not necessarily a meaningful search term, but things like rent strike and also combining different search queries has meant that we can input data into these fields, which if you wanted to organize a rent strike, and we also did a workshop with a renters union around organizing rent strikes, you can click on rent strikes and it will come up with all the documents that mention that as well. And it was also a really useful way of breaking material out of their own collections or their own groups and make connections across the digital archive as well, because often we found that digitizations often, unless it's like a project around a very specific collection. Often they also sit on the catalogue. They're not really necessarily always open access, and they stay within that kind of collection as well, unless there's some sort of good tagging. So we really wanted to make links between, say, this group is called Big Flame, and how maybe they inherited ideas around rent strike from struggles that were going on in Italy at the time. And so these were quite interesting ways to sort of make connections between those as well. So we've also developed tools to kind of collectively or collaboratively work on the archive. So rather than it just being a repository, it's a way of sort of interrogating that material more online. And so we have a kind of clipping and scrapbook tool, and we did a lot of online workshops during the pandemic about making these kind of scrapbook resources for people who are interested in. This again was around rent strikes that we did with the tenants union. I just want to quickly highlight this idea of an archive of archives, which Leftovers very much is, and also how bringing all these collections together isn't necessarily a way of centralizing. It is an act of centralization, but it also helps to link back to smaller archives as well. And we've developed a lot of kind of sisterly relationships where we share material and people also send us material, and it's a way of also backing up each other's archives, which are increasingly like fragile without institutional support. And us as a small archive feel like it's very important to be able to build these networks of support around what would otherwise be quite a fragile sort of ecosystem of digitizations. And these are some examples of the archives that we work for. Archives Autonomy, which is a French website, Archivo Grafton, which is an Italian one, and the Sparrow's Nest in Nottingham, which is an anarchist archive. We also back up sort of homeless data. We were given a Google file of all the Black Panther Party papers, which we then OCR'd and inputted into the system. And also more recently, we backed up some of the spare rib digitizations from the British Library, which are no longer available online because of an EU copyright directorate post-Brexit. And you can see that there. And finally, I just wanted to make a sort of advocation of digitization and the dissemination of digitizations as a form of preservation. And this really took our lead from Padma's 10 Theses of Archiving, which referenced the founder of the Cinematheque Française, who stated that the best way to preserve a film was to project it. And because we don't have that many resources at Mayday Rooms, we don't really have the ability to do kind of high-end digitization for sort of preservation. But what we thought we could do is make a very open access archive which focuses on the dissemination of ours and other people's material. And these are public. Everything on Leftovers previously was public. It's not personal documents. It's everything that sort of remained public and part of struggles, and we think that they should remain open access. So we rather favour this idea of dissemination as preservation, and continue to try and build and distribute the files and copies that we have made. I think I'm a bit out of time, so I will end it there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Amalia and Rosemary, for these wonderful presentations, sharing your work in both ways different ways, but in both cases about liberatory memory work. We have we will go now to the Q&A, and I will still encourage to post questions in the Q&A session, in the Q&A section. We will go through them. So I have a first question from Daniele to Amalia. So Daniele is asking, I very much agree with your point about the need for documenting the documenters. cultural institutions hold information about the history of their descriptions, but this is usually not made visible to the public. Do you think that allowing people to see a multi-layer view showing how the record has changed over time could be a way to address this issue? I think that's a question about information visualization.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Daniel, for your question. I think definitely, and in the current atmosphere of going back to research the history of collections, particularly colonial collections, I think this approach, I mean, the history of collections definitely goes through their archives, the institutional archives. And I can see that some institutions might have an issue with making everything accessible for their user, for the people to see, but I think that's also a way of facing the past in a sense, and this is also part of what I mentioned about the colonial archival praxis. There is also a great article by J.J. Gadar and Michelle Caswell that they raise this topic about documenting our own role, you know, the role of archivists in this thing. So I hope that answers this question. And there is a second one, Marco.
Yeah, perhaps we could. I think there are other questions, but perhaps we can go to one for Rosemary, if it's okay. So another question from Daniela is, since you're aggregating material coming from different archives, have you faced any issues related bringing all the metadata into a single system, but just for different formats or data models so they are compatible with each other? Now, to say it's also something that interests me, especially as I understand, you work with a lot of collections which are really need to be understood in a very contextual manner. Yeah.
I mean, we often, we do a lot of data scraping from these collections which are sort of already online. So yeah, they don't necessarily always fit within our model, but we are usually able to extract and find houses for like particular particular information, and then we obviously go over our more like custom fields and then try and input as we can. I mean, it's still very much a work in progress, so some of those records are not so well filled in, and some really are as well. I must say that like I always think of it a bit like going on a sort of like treasure hunt of the internet. Like these aren't necessarily archives that have a very kind of like a catalog. It might be a group of friends who have digitized things and put them online. It's not, we have interacted with some more like official archives, but the majority of material on leftovers is like people who think it's important that those digitizations exist and maintain their own kind of online resources around them as well. And that's why I mean this imperative to like back these kind of initiatives up as well, because they're usually a few people and like very much punching above their weight and like really doing some seriously good kind of archival work, but it's not necessarily recognized or within a particular metadata system.
Great, thank you. Actually, I have a question for you both. So I think you both use technology in different ways to do this kind of salvage work that you described in your projects. But I think I heard, if I understood correctly from you, Amalia, you also identified some limitations, especially like named entity recognition. And so I would, as we have like this big digital project, especially Tank is one of the one as well that really push for this kind of technical developments. I would like to ask you both, perhaps if you could speak or reflect a bit on yeah, the kind of where you see this kind of potential, but also limitations of digital tools for doing kind of this salvage work you're doing.
I mean, on my end, I think that it starts a little bit from the human factor, in the sense that we had tried previously to do some OCR on some digitized pages from the 1700s, and just because those pages were really, the paper had become very dark and it was very spotted, really the OCR gave some unusable results. So for example, sometimes I have been thinking, just because these documents are so repetitive, most of them, they are the same legalese, how to say, the same language. I mean, sometimes I've been thinking if really digitization is the correct approach, or if simply it wouldn't serve us better if simply we put a lot of people and did the transfer of that information directly on a transcription basis, you see, without really the in-between of the digitization, which is incredibly costly. And in this case, it wouldn't really allow you to do OCR or named entity recognition. So, I mean, I see, again, a variety of problematic things here.
I mean, I would never advocate I really appreciate Mayday's practice around its paper archive and building this relationship to history and political struggle, which is like very much a social relation, and that's what you need to build movements, engage in this kind of material as well. So I wouldn't say a digital archive should in any way replace that. We've tried to sort of think through what our practices around our paper archive and translate that into sort of a digital form. And actually it's quite, it's very well used, and unless everyone has really amazing VPNs from all over the world, it's kind of quite globally used as well. And it tries to incorporate, it's again still predominantly English language, but we are trying to bring in more kind of languages into that as well. So I really think that it has become a sort of interesting resource as well. And we get approached by people who want to digitize their collections. We have open digitization tools here as well, and we're going to work towards having a set of like guides of how to do your own digitization and upload your material to the archive as well. So, because I mean, we don't really go out and collect stuff at Mayday Rooms. People, because we're part of this bigger kind of network of political engagement, people often just deposit stuff. And that can be, they're usually some things that someone found in their cupboard or under their bed or like in the attic. And this is because a lot of our depositors are also still alive. And I should stress that this is mainly from the sort of late 60s onwards as well. So really dealing with a very specific type of political ephemera. But we really wanted to think about what it might mean to, some people want to digitize their material, but they want to keep it as well. So we often do digitization and then give that material back as well, because yeah, we think that, as I said, this kind of copying and dissemination and making this stuff available is the sort of best form of preservation that we can think of, that kind of mirrors our like politics and our work and our lack of resources.
That's great, thank you. There's one more question for Amalia, which I would perhaps pose. It's a more technical question. I see that you're attempting to use RIC-O. This is a relatively new data model, which fills the gap for a standard model for archives. Can you say some more about how you're using it and what is the advantage compared to other models, for instance, CDOC CRM, which were not tailored specifically to archives?
Yes, yeah, thanks again, Danielle. So I will not say that I'm in no way an expert in RICO. I just started trying to see if it would be useful and implemented here. And the reason why I wanted to examine it is because the way that I started out, let me actually show it, it will make it more visible. I started out by essentially trying to use, sorry, because of this camera, I'm not sure. So I tried to use the model of the enslaved.org project, but because that model is based on the, it wants to increase interoperability, so necessarily it dumps down the information that it makes interoperable. For example, if you see the information for the source that they require, it's only document type, source, start date, and the project, which for my purposes did not work because I wanted to show that in between lines. So I'm not so much interested, okay, yes, this is important, the content, the date itself. So I'm not so much interested for that. I'm interested on the archival trajectory of that document and why, when it happened and what actors were involved and why. So I found that the fields of the RICO model, the way that it describes that a record has different instantiations, that these instantiations are based on agencies or mandates and on a variety of actors, that appeals to the way that of what I want to show, but eventually, definitely, I want to contact people who are using it or who are better at it than me. And if you have more experience with this, I would really appreciate some help, because it's just at the beginning.
Excellent. Thank you. We're nearly hitting 2 o'clock. I think I would say thank you for responding to these questions from our audience, and we have, and I would hand over the last minute to my colleague Fotini.
So at that point, on behalf of all the organizers, we would like to thank, first of all, our speakers who shared their very inspiring research with us today, as well as you for being with us throughout the seminar series. As this is the final seminar, we're happy to share with you that we will be hosting the Sloane Lab Online Symposium Series also next year. So we look forward to see you then. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.